Hi everyone, here's the thing. What's great about part of the internet is how it's has helped for the longest time, has helped us to talk to each other, spread ideas and messages. It's to some extent, it's all we have. And in the short term, it's what we can count on the most. If the powers that ought not to be in my country are driving me mad, I can tune into people around the world and see if things are different where they live. Get advice, information, just share. Sometimes it's just about a good chat. And when I want to find out what's happening in Canada, to get that, to see it from a personal standpoint, I like to go to a brilliant person of my acquaintance, who's my guest today, David Crayden, journalist and podcaster. But before I launch into the interview, let me tell you how you can support the channel. Go to patreon.com, if you will. Find me, Neil Oliver, and sign up. Part with the price of a cup of coffee once a month. Get exclusive access to a question and answer session with me every week. First look, early look at all content. There's competitions. It's a great site. There's a great reservoir of wisdom in there that's been contributed to by so many people. Come along and be part of it. The link's in the notes below, and it's on my website, neiloliver.com. I cannot wait to talk to David Crayden. Yes, everyone, it's an interview that's in prospect with the inestimable David Crayden, my Canadian friend, journalist with experience of the military, which is also useful.
There we go.
There he is. There is Mr. David Crayden.
There we are.
The legend that is.
It's so nice to see you again, Neil.
It's nice to see you. Yes, as I say, there's Jesse on patrol.
All right.
Yeah, we'll get right into it. We're already recording. David. Yeah. Can you see Boris Johnson?
Why, Boris Johnson's in the neighborhood?
I do hope not. He'll live to regret it. Yeah, it's all kicking off. Yes, everyone, thanks for coming back to the channel, the Neil Oliver channel. My guest today is David Crayden, who's a regular face on here, a good friend, journalist, podcaster, a man of some military experience, which is relevant given the fact that Britain is intent on going to war with mighty Russia. David, how are you?
Oh, just great, Neil. So nice to be back.
All manner of unpleasantness seems to be unfolding for right-thinking Canadian people, and who better to get an update from than your good self? How are things on your side of the Atlantic?
Well, things are increasingly looking like things are in the UK, in Canada. Mark Carney likes to describe himself as a European. And of course, he was the governor of the Bank of Canada and the Bank of England. He was an utter failure at both. But somehow Mark Carney has become prime minister, and he's been very good at doing one thing legislatively, and that's pushing through surveillance and censorship bills. And when he's not doing that, he's emboldening and empowering his former company, Brookfield Asset Management, with deals around the world. Everywhere Mark Carney goes as prime minister, Brookfield is not far behind, or they have been there a couple of days in advance. So it's difficult to know if Mark Carney's selling Canada or Brookfield Asset Management. And this has been the story of his life, of course. The private interest, the crony capitalism intersects with his political duties, if you will. He's always been a bit of a politician, even as a banker. But this is a guy who really can't seem to understand where his private interests begin and his public interest ends or begins. And this is where we're at right now. And I want to mention this because I'll probably forget to say it. We had a real tragedy here in Canada about 6 weeks ago, where the Canadian Food Inspection Agency had occupied an ostrich farm for literally 7 weeks.
On the one hand, it's such a bizarre sounding story, but the way in which it played out was ugly.
It was horrible because a lot of people couldn't understand this was about private property and farmers having a right to their private property, their livestock, their livelihood, and the government completely overruling that. And they ended up massacring hundreds. We're still not sure how many ostriches were killed, how many the government might have taken because they wanted the medical evidence? How many were actually buried because they won't confirm what happened to the bodies of these ostriches? But in the process, rules, regulations, and laws were broken, were violated, and the massacre that occurred, it's absolutely unforgivable that any Canadian farm should have to put up with this, because these ostriches, of course, were healthy. There was no reason for this so-called cull. Hate that word. Sounds so simple, sounds so innocuous. There was no reason for it. If they had avian flu the last December, we're talking a year ago, they had developed herd immunity to it and overcome it. And this was the message the farm tried to get across to Canadians for 11 months. And CFIA, the Canadian Food Inspection Agency, steadfastly refused to retest these ostriches and said they didn't have to, didn't need to, just won't do it because we're just going to do what we want to do, which was to intimidate these farmers and to kill their livestock. And that to me was indicative and emblematic of how Canada is rapidly descending into an authoritarian style state. And I think here's the segue, because I've been following what's happening in your country right now in terms of the opposition to digital ID. Mark Carney said he was going to think about digital ID for Canada, but we haven't made a final decision yet. Total lie. Digital ID was introduced in the last federal budget. So it's there. We are facing digital ID just as you are in the UK, and there's not sufficient pushback. We need people to come out in the streets as they are in Great Britain to oppose this odious policy, because with the combination of digital ID and the censorship bills that Mark Carney is pushing, and they're already bad enough, but we're anticipating the reintroduction of this Online Harms Act with the thought crimes component, probably in January when the House comes back, or February, whenever they come back from their Christmas break. But this is going to happen. We have a slew of hate speech, malicious communication laws in front of Parliament right now. One of them is in committee and could be up for third reading when the House comes back. That's where Canada is going. It's following in the footsteps of the mother country, if you will. It's going as authoritarian. It's going as crazy as Herr Keir Starmer's government. And Mark Carney is a very authoritarian man who really doesn't think he needs the permission or even the tolerance of Parliament or the people. He is going to do what he wants to do, and he's going to push it through.
You know, the thing with the ostrich farm, you know, it reeked of, you know, pour encourager les autres. It was, we can do this. You know, this is the kind of thing that we can do. And furthermore, this is the kind of thing that we will do and that we do. And when you say you look across at the mother country and you fear the way in which we're all on the same path, it's all about the centralisation of and the authoritarian hand on the steering wheel of farming. It's about centralising. It's about centralising the food production. You know, it's about sending the message, is it not, to the people that when it comes to food, you'll take what you're given. And it will not be the case that a farmer, you know, and the land that he farms, perhaps, you know, that his parents and grandparents farmed, that's no guarantee of any kind of continuity. You know, because continuity is always the enemy, I would say, of these authoritarians. You know, they need to deracinate. They need to cut people away at the roots. And I think the easiest ways where they can make metaphors of cutting away the roots or take them actually into the literal is with farming. Mm-hmm. You know, we will cut these people out of the land. We will uproot them and take them aside, and we will be in control. We will make the decisions about what may or may not ultimately become part of the food supply. You know, and you know, you could look on it. A cull of ostriches is such a surreal story. Ostriches in Canada, you know, but underneath it all is something very, very dark.
It was very dark, and for anybody who went through that night where they had one, possibly two marksmen, and we're still not sure whether they were CFIA marksmen or they're RCMP or they're Canadian Forces, Special Forces, possibly. But they expended about 1,000 rounds to kill maybe 300 ostriches. And it was a bloodbath, a literal bloodbath. And they left the farm in just an atrocious mess with hay everywhere, hay bales contaminated with the blood and debris of these slaughtered ostriches. And of course, the CFIA continues to insist that they were inundated with avian influenza, and therefore the farm is still under a quarantine. They can't even clean up the mess. It looks like a war zone. But they have been ordered just not to touch anything and leave the mess as the CFIA left it. And this has really shattered a lot of trust the Canadians had in basically that the government bureaucracy was not that bad, was not that evil. And if that began to, of course, deteriorate during the COVID pandemic, when people realized the government doesn't have your best interests at heart.
And you get it all the time with museum collections. Oh, that was looted from us. The Benin
Yeah.
bronzes, you name it. Nation and so on and so on. And so you think, well, if you play that out, eventually there's nothing in a museum anywhere. Because everything will, by definition, everything will have been repatriated. And you might say, well, fair enough, because the original owners have a claim on it. But if it becomes the case that everybody has to, as it were, go back where they came from, well, then where are we? If the example is, well, the indigenous Canadians and the indigenous Americans and the Maori and the Australian Aborigine, they're the ones with a claim on this place because it's their ancestral homeland. What if everybody everywhere has to make room for the return of those who were disenfranchised and dispersed in history? Are your people supposed to, as it were, go back where they came from and claim ancestral title to wherever that is? Where does that game of ownership, original title, end?
Well, the clear answer is it doesn't end, because there's probably not a square foot of property or land anywhere in the world where somebody can't claim their ancestors were there first, or before whoever is there now. And this, of course, is insanity. And what we've lost in the process is an understanding of equality under the law. And I go back to Ayn Rand, who used to always like to say that when you have collective rights over individual rights, where you judge people on the basis of their ethnicity, on the color of their skin, on their historical legacy, when you don't judge people as individuals, but you judge them as groups, as collectives, then she says you have tribal warfare. And that's exactly what we have striven to rise above in Western civilization. Stop these attacks among gangs. And that's exactly where we're back at it now with identity politics. There's not equality under the law. I don't have the same equality under the law as an Aboriginal person in Canada. They have more rights than I do because of their ethnicity. Now, there was a country in Europe in the 1930s and 40s that had the same philosophy, that if you were judged to be a real German, a citizen of Germany, you had special status over people who were judged not to be real Germans. The ideology is exactly the same. I don't care if you want to call it Aryan, or you want to call it Native, or what do you want to call it. It's not equality under the law. It's special status. That's been happening in Canada for decades now, and we are now reaping the dividends of that. And it's frightening what is happening. And a lot of people are saying, how did we come to this? Well, it's been happening incrementally over the years. I've been talking about it for decades in my writing, in speeches I've made. It's been a huge concern for me. I want to see what we used to call color blindness, as articulated by Martin Luther King, when he said people should be judged not on the basis of the color of their skin, but on the content of their character. We have lost perspective of that in most Western democracies. We don't really believe in equality. We believe some people should have more rights than other people, and that there should be this constant redistribution of authority, this constant grappling of gangs, of tribes, of people fighting each other over who their ancestors were. That's something we used to think we had gone beyond, and we're right back in the middle of it right now.
There's something, to me, paradoxical about what is happening ideologically in relation to when it's happening, which is to say now. I suppose 100 years ago or more, when essentially people were still isolated from what was going on really much beyond the end of their garden fences. They were reliant on slow-moving information about the rest of the world. It could take weeks for information, for people to catch up on what was happening elsewhere, and you could live out your whole life, and certainly for almost all of time, and as recently as a century ago, you could live out your life not really knowing what was happening. If you were in Britain, you didn't necessarily know what was happening in darkest Africa or in the Far East or in on the west coast of the United States of America. And so for people of a globalist star chamber mentality, in that context, you could treat people differently in different places because there would be no collective realization that, hang on a minute, see if you're in Canada and you can prove ancestral title, you get preferential treatment. Now, I here in England, I could do that too because I can demonstrate via the Doomsday Book or whatever that my family have been here for 1,000 years and beyond the reach of memory.
Yeah.
So now they're imposing these things that if you allow, because of the internet, apart from anything else, everybody knows or is able to know everything about everybody else in the world in real time. And it doesn't work because there's no intention to have equality or uniformity. But the people, the general populace, can see the blatant inequalities all over the place, all around them, all the time. So they can't. The powers that be cannot, in any sane universe, operate like this. Because if you're telling me that, an Aboriginal Canadian has preferential, better rights than David Crayden does, I can play that game here. I mean, I had my DNA tested 15 years ago. Apparently, my mitochondrial DNA from my mother's been here for 8,000 years. I've got a pretty strong claim on the place. In the face of any Johnny come lately. This is my country. And we all know there's too much diffusion of information. We all watched what happened. It's a clumsy segue, but we all watched what happened on Bondi Beach.
Yeah.
Now, not only were we all able to watch that happening in real time, people were watching that practically before the bullets stopped flying, and certainly within minutes, people were asking questions about the ethnicities and nationalities of the shooters, their true identities. The whole thing was up for grabs, even as it was happening. The days of being able to keep a lid on a narrative are just gone. You can't treat people in isolation anymore because they're not.
And I think it drove a lot of people crazy that the guy who risked his life to stop this was Arabic and Muslim.
He was the son of Syrian immigrants, yes.
It didn't quite work. It didn't agree with the narrative. But immediately, Neil, I'm seeing stories in Canada saying, we're next. It's going to happen here now because anti-Semitism is so rife. And I'm thinking, it's absolute nonsense. Absolute nonsense. There is absolutely no reason to make stupid predictions. Oh, it's going to happen in Canada next. Where? We're going to wait till the spring at least? Or this is absolutely, it's out of control because and it's amazing if you watch social media reporting on what happened at Bondi Beach, compare that to the mainstream media. It's like there's two different worlds there, and some things are just not getting reported by the mainstream media at all because they've got an agenda with this, and it's all about promoting this totem of anti-Semitism being everywhere, and we're all anti-Semitic, even if we criticize anything Israel does or says. And I'm happy to see Australia is not exactly getting knuckled under by this. And there seems to be some pushback in terms of maybe this does not represent.
They're changing, but definitions are changing all the time. The definition of anti-Semitism has changed, by orders of magnitude. It's changed beyond recognition from what I grew up understanding anti-Semitism to mean. I grew up understanding that anti-Semitism was where, you were physically victimizing, violent attacks, all of the rest of it. But anti-Semitism now, as it seems to be manifesting itself on college campuses in the United States of America, would be if you have a question to ask about what the present Israeli administration is doing in Gaza, is to be anti-Semitic. Now that doesn't make any kind of sense, and it gets to the point where are we saying that it's illegal to dislike? Because that's a can of worms. You know, I remember I was talking to my wife about this today. I mean, I'm old enough to remember during the anti-apartheid protest and movement that eventually, you know, the situation in South Africa obviously changed. But there was a time in the 80s when white South Africans were fair game. You were positively encouraged to hate them. I have to say I never did. But it was perfectly fine to accuse any and every white South African of being a lumpen Boer, who was to be treated with outright contempt. It was fine to do that. That was a whole group, that was a whole population that it was okay to hate. You would not get picked up in the street for being anti-white South African. Far from it. But we seem to be getting to a point where you're not allowed to dislike. It was fine to dislike white South Africans. Nobody cared about it. But now there are groups and there are some groups that you're not even allowed to think negatively about. While again, simultaneously, there are other groups of people, Gazans, Palestinians. It's fine to hate them. Absolutely fine. There's no, you will not get into bother if you were to voice that kind of emotion and that kind of feeling. Where is the parity? Where is the rationale?
Well, that is precisely a point I've been trying to make over these hate speech laws in your country and in mine. And I think they're very dangerous. I don't want hate crimes legislation at all. It's toxic. I don't give a damn if you hated the person because of his or her ethnicity or race or anything else. If you kill somebody, you kill somebody. If it's murder, it doesn't matter if it was motivated by racial prejudice. All murder is motivated by hatred to some degree. It doesn't matter.
It does tend to factor in, yes.
And that's so commonsensical. But yet we have to complicate it by putting, first of all, hate crimes legislation. Canada was doing that as far back as the 1970s. Now we have a preponderance of these hate speech laws coming. Some of them have been put in place. The worst is yet to come if it's not stopped. But while I'm still thinking of it, Neil, I wanted to bring this up with you because I'm sure you watched the interview with the woman who was had her house invaded with 11 police officers because of a private text. And I won't mention the word, but it's the FAGGGOT word. She didn't even mean it in that homosexual sense. It's like slang amongst her peers. And she used this word in a private text message. That wasn't even a public declaration on social media. But she was attacked by this individual, and she sort of referred to him with this word, saying, it's just like, these people are all alike. But she wasn't even mentioning it or using it in a sexual sense. And she didn't say it on public social media. She said it in private text. So she's sitting at home in her bathtub. 11 police officers, 10 of them male, come through her front door because it's not locked, go up the stairs and walk into her bathroom where she's nude in the bathtub, and they don't want to leave. And my first question is, who the hell should have been charged here? This woman for using a word that some people don't like in a private text message, or these cops who are clearly demonstrating some degree of sexual harassment, potentially even sexual assault, by standing in a complete stranger's bathroom, a woman's bathroom, where she's unclothed, and she's saying, please leave, and they won't. Somebody should have been charged there, but it shouldn't have been the woman, it should have been the cops. But as she said, And this is what ties in with all I've been talking about with the hate crimes and with the what happened to the ostrich farm, to Katie and her family out there in Edgewood, BC. This woman said, who should we be afraid of these days? The police. They're the ones who came into my house, violated my rights and my dignity, and said I basically have no rights because I use some offensive language in a private text, and that abrogates all of my foundational democratic freedoms. That was disgusting to me when I heard that. But that's coming for Canada, and I don't always like Piers Morgan, but I'm glad he did that interview and brought that story out, because that has been seen now by a lot of people in the U.S. and Canada who say, hey, this could happen here. Not as likely in the U.S. because they have a First Amendment right for free speech. Canada has no First Amendment right for free speech. It's very, very, shall we say, vague. Just as property rights are very vague in our Charter of Rights and our Constitution. But it could happen. It could easily happen here in Canada. And who were they afraid of at the ostrich farm? The cops. Because the cops were reinforcing the outrageous, cruel behavior of a government bureaucracy. The cops were in their pocket. And the cops in this country are increasingly the national, are lauded Royal Canadian Mounted Police of historical fame, movie fame. They are in the pocket of the Liberal Party and the Liberal government. And they have been for the last 10 years. They refuse to cross swords with Liberal prime ministers. They back up everything they do. And that's what we come to in this country. I'm more worried about the cops coming to my front door and threatening me, intimidating me, than I am about the mob, if you will.
To me, I mean, it's hard to say, to use this term, what I'm most afraid of, because it's really kind of 10 horses running neck and neck at the moment. But amongst that lineup, it's the end of jury trials in Britain for anything but murder and rape. I mean, jury trials almost gone anyway, without anybody noticing it. Less than 1% of cases in criminal cases in Britain come before a jury anyway. So to all intents and purposes, jury trial is gone. It's just that now the right to it is gone. And to me, that is absolutely, especially in a context like you're describing. The police entering a woman's home and and confronting her like that, naked, mob-handed, naked in the bath when she's in the bath. And you talk about we don't have rights without the right to trial by jury, whether or not you can actually get a trial by jury. But without the right to trial by jury, being arrested by the police then just becomes an unstoppable movement into what they call a court, where a judge who is an employee of the state that wrote the legislation that caused you to be in that court, your time in the court is only an exercise in them deciding how long to send you to jail for. Because your guilt is predetermined. You are guilty. You are effectively going to be presumed guilty if it makes the point that the establishment, the state, wants to make. When you look on at the end of trial by jury in Britain, what does your spine do?
It's frightening, because if you listen to these judges, especially when they are issuing decrees and sentencing and guilty verdicts for the so-called keyboard warriors, that anyone who happens to issue a dissenting opinion over the internet, the judges are talking like these people are guilty of the worst, most heinous crimes that could be possibly committed. It almost reminds me of the over-the-top nonsense you used to get from the people's courts in Germany under people like Roland Friesler, who couldn't decide throughout his entire career whether he was on the extreme right or the extreme left. But they used to issue these incredibly over-the-top sentencing pronouncements about people people being just the scum of the earth because they dared to oppose the official ideology of the German state. They dared to oppose the leader. They dared to issue a dissenting opinion. And that because of that, they were just worthless pieces of garbage. And this is the way they used to talk, these judges. But I'm hearing the same sort of idiocy from British jurists, British judges, judges, and who are making the same incredibly stupid condemnation of people who just want to exercise their free speech. But that's no longer something that's important in Britain. And I'm anticipating the same sort of nonsense from Canadian judges who are woven from the same cloth, and who really do think that their job is to protect criminals and to put people in jail for free speech. And that's where we are. And I find the fact that, as you say, only rape and murder now are crimes that can be assessed by a jury. Well, because it's a lot easier to keep people silent.
I find there's a terrible irony in the fact that those two particular crimes have been set aside, because they are crimes against the person, obviously. And, it's my contention that the state doesn't give a damn what happens to people in terms of crimes against their person. And that's made evident by the fact that, people have been sentenced to more jail time in the UK for social media posts, and only social media posts, than people who have participated in the gang rape of children. I mean, that is a fact. So, proof if proof were needed that when it comes to rape, including the rape of children, the state's prepared to, find a reason why you shouldn't go to jail for doing that. And then there's and murder. Well, if these lowlifes are murdering one another, what care we? Our priorities are whether or not the ideology is being challenged by the people of this country. So there's a terrible irony that they've decided that you may provide a trial by jury in the case of rape and murder, because the state doesn't care what happens to the people. Look at the legislation, the assisted dying, abortion up to the point of birth.
Yeah.
The sanctity of life is. We're looking at that in the rear view mirror in Britain.
Well, Canada is the home of the Medical Assistance in Dying program, which is a increasingly lethal euthanasia project that is expanding the so-called eligibility of doctors to kill you, and of course we have abortion on demand up to the birth of the child in this country, and we have no abortion law in Canada. We have euthanasia, and we have no abortion law, and that's the cult of death that Canada is celebrating, and that's very, very much a part of what this country has become. But there's a term, and I was reminded of it some months back by a commenter on my station who said, "David, it's a narco-tyranny." And I said, "A narco-tyranny? I haven't heard that since my political science days in Carleton." And he said, "In case you've forgotten what a narco-tyranny is," and I had. He said, "It's where the state punishes its political opponents and goes very easy on real criminals." And I thought, thank God that's Canada, because, yeah, people getting 2 years for murder in this country, but yet the Crown wanted Tamara Leach and Chris Barber, the organizers of the Freedom Convoy, a peaceful protest that never broke a window, never occupied a building. They wanted 8 years imprisonment. Thank God they didn't get it, but they're trying again. They're appealing the house arrest they got. But the very fact that a crown attorney would consider 8 years imprisonment for a peaceful protester who just wasn't protesting something they happened to agree with is absolutely shocking. But that's where we've come to in this country. It's a narco-tyranny. And that's what Edgewood, BC, the ostrich farm was all about. That was a narco-tyranny. punishing political opponents, punishing people who don't agree with the government. And while they were 120, this is incredible, 120 RCMP officers at one point occupying that farm with dozens of CFIA inspectors. I call them goons because they were clearly incompetent to do anything except kill things. While there were 120 cops at this farm, and there wasn't a single arm on this farm, by the way, because the government has confiscated all weapons from farmers, is in the process of taking the last weapons from farmers. There was no armed threat there. There was no threat that they were going to be violent. The people there were all peaceful. There was no real threat there, but 120 cops that contained this. Meanwhile, the fentanyl is coming in at the Vancouver ports unmolested. Gang warfare is increasing in Vancouver, and the cops really can't be bothered with that, because that's a little more work than occupying a ostrich farm in the Kootenays in the basin of the Rocky Mountains and just living it up on the public dollar every day, staying in the best hotels and wining and dining yourself on the government money or taxpayer money. That was a little easier mission for these people, and that's what they really wanted to do. And the government has gotten away with it. But there is tremendous pushback behind, and there's an undercurrent of pushback that I'm tapping into, and I'm seeing a lot of people say this cannot continue. This cannot happen again. But I don't know I don't know if time has run out for this country or not. I really don't. And I think one of the only things that might save Canada from itself is if Alberta separates. And there's a strong potential for that to happen within the next year or two. Never been more likely. At one time, it was all basically something that only a lunatic fringe would even have contemplated was not going to happen. It's become so mainstream in Alberta now because of the resentment of the continual liberal regime in Ottawa and how it impacts especially Western Canada, but even more especially the people of Alberta.
All I can say is, as long as people like you and I we keep talking, and I know that there's an audience out there that is listening, and that is all that we can do at the moment, and it's an important contribution. Your contribution is vital, David. Once again, I think we've been talking there for just exactly 60 minutes there. So, with the intention that we will talk again soon, I will simply say, for now, thank you, David Kraydon.
Thank you, Neil, and thank you for the work you do. We watch you. We love your work, love your books, love all your dedication, and thank you for having me on. It's always a pleasure. God bless you.